And now, the general weather around Alaska.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-855-937-4977. Get updates to the forecast through that means as well. Starting off, we'll take a look at our fire danger. Most of the state, we're not seeing a whole lot of activity, but as we look out over the Yukon Flats area and some other areas around the interior of the state, we do have some medium and some areas of high for our spruce fire danger for today. As we look out over our forecast, out over mainland Alaska, we have some ridging that is out over southwest Alaska extending from the northern Pacific. We're going to have to keep an eye on that because right now that's holding off some precip farther to the west and keeping areas along the west coast fairly dry. This ridging is expected to start to slowly move off to the east, but it's also going to diminish. And then as we look up to the north, we have some rain expected for the Brooks Range and up along the eastern areas of the Arctic coast. Some areas of fog are also all along the Arctic coastline, and that rain is going to extend down through the interior and then down into south central Alaska, especially the more eastern locations of south central. As we look down in the Panhandle area, most of the areas are fairly dry. Some isolated areas of showers in the coastal mountains and along the North Gulf Coast by the Yakutat area. And we do want to point out, even though we don't have any active precipitation around Mendenhall Lake, we do have in Suicide Basin water levels rising up to that of when the glacier dam release happened last year. So we are expecting in the next week or so the potential dam release for Suicide Basin, and that could result in some flooding for Mendenhall River. As we look out farther to the west on the western side of our ridge, we do have a system moving in from the west that's bringing some rain throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands and running up into our ridge. However, as we move into tonight, we can see that ridge really starting to flatten out, allowing our low pressure system to approach the west coast of the state and starting to bring in some rain to southwest Alaska and up the west coast to the Kotzebue Sound area. Also rain throughout much of the Bering Sea and down in the Aleutian Islands. Looking out over the rest of the mainland, with our ridging sliding a little bit more to the east, we are seeing some more clearing for much of the interior down and through the western portions of south central Alaska, including Cook Inlet. And then still to the east of that, with this trough that we have sitting over the border of the state, we do have some rain extending down into the Prince William Sound area as well as out in the Gulf of Alaska. Up north, we still have some rain lingering over eastern portions of the Arctic coast, and then fog all the way along the Arctic coastline for tonight. Down in the Panhandle area, still fairly dry, with the exception of the Yakutat area where we are expecting to see some rain tonight. As we move into Thursday, pretty dry remaining for Panhandle area, some isolated showers in the coastal ranges and out by Yakutat again. But as we look out farther to the west, we are going to see our ridge really flattened out here, allowing our frontal system to push inland to the west coast of the state, extending rain all throughout the Bristol Bay area into the western portions of the interior, all along the west coast, up to the northwest portions of the state. Along the Arctic coastline, fairly dry, but we are still expecting to see fog for Thursday. In the southern portions of the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands, continued rain riding over the top of our old ridge. As we move into Friday, we are going to see more rainfall for the Aleutian Islands throughout the Bering Sea as we have these weaker systems moving through the pattern. That's going to spread rain across most of the state. Heaviest rain is going to be along the west coast, but lighter rainfall expecting out through much of the interior, down through south central and all along the Arctic coastline. And along the Arctic coast, we are expecting to also see that mixed with fog. And then we're going to finally see rain returning to the Panhandle area on Friday from that southerly push of moisture that we're seeing from a low farther to the south in the North Pacific. Taking a look at our temperatures, low temps for Thursday morning in the lower to mid 50s for the Panhandle area. So look out over south central Alaska, low to mid 50s there as well. Warmer temperatures in the more inland locations, Talkeetna and Glenallen only getting down to 54 degrees. Let's look into our afternoon highs on Thursday afternoon. Primarily 60s for south central locations, warmer in the interior locations, Talkeetna up to as high as 74 degrees Thursday afternoon. Then down in the Panhandle, mid 60s down by Sitka, but most places around 70 degrees for those highs. Yakutat staying a little bit cooler, only getting up to 61 degrees Thursday. And then Friday morning dropping down into the lower mid 50s once again for the Panhandle, as well as out for south central Alaska. As we look at our Friday afternoon highs, getting up into the 60s once again for most of the south central area, 70s for those more interior locations. This time Glen Allen's going to be the warmest, getting up to 78 degrees. And then down in the Panhandle, Sitka's still staying a little bit cooler there, 65 degrees. Most locations getting up around 70, and Yakutat 61 degrees Friday afternoon. As we move up into the interior, upper 40s to mid 50s for the lows for the interior. Up along the Arctic coastline, we're going to see temperatures dropping down just below 40 up by Utqiagvik, and then in the 40s for much of the rest of the Arctic coast. Down the west coast of the state, we are expecting temperatures to drop into the mid 40s for much of the Kotzebue Sound area, and upper 40s as we get to Norton Sound. Thursday afternoon, getting up into the lower to mid 50s for Norton Sound area. Out by St. Lawrence Island, a little bit cooler there, 48 degrees for those highs, mid 50s for the Kotzebue Sound area. And then in the lower to mid 50s for most of the areas along the Arctic coast. Utqiagvik staying much colder there, 42 degrees expected high. Getting up into the 70s in the central portions of the interior. For Yukon area, getting up to around 75 degrees Thursday. Friday morning dropping down into the 50s for most of the interior, a little bit warmer in the southeastern portions of the interior. Up along the Arctic coastline, temperatures dropping down into the mid 30s to near 40 degrees. And then as you look along the west coast, dropping down into the mid 40s for the Kotzebue Sound area and upper 40s for the Norton Sound. Friday afternoon highs getting up into the mid 50s for Norton Sound as well as in Kotzebue Sound. A little bit colder as we move off to the west by areas right along the coastline and for St. Lawrence Island. Up along the Arctic coast, around 50 degrees for those highs. Still cooler at Utqiagvik, only getting up to 38 degrees on Friday. Then in the interior, cooler out west, getting into the mid 60s there, and then getting into the 70s as we get to the eastern portions of the interior. For the west coast in southwest Alaska, all around 50 degrees for those lows Thursday morning, down through the Bristol Bay area as well. Alaska Peninsula into the mid 40s, and the mid 40s to near 50 degrees for the Aleutian Islands. Thursday afternoon highs getting up to near 60 degrees for the Bethel area, a little bit cooler along the coast, near 70 degrees for Bristol Bay area, mid 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and in the 50s for much of the Aleutian Islands. Dropping down Thursday morning to near 50 degrees for most of the YK Delta area, lower 50s for the Bristol Bay area, near 50 for the Alaska Peninsula and much of the Aleutian Islands, some places getting down into the mid 40s, and that's going to be true for St. Paul as well. Friday afternoon, getting up into lower 60s in interior locations of the YK Delta, mid 50s along the coastline, in the lower 60s for Bristol Bay, in the mid 50s to upper 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and in the 50s for much of the Aleutian Islands, 54 expected for St. Paul. Looking out at our climate forecast, this is for our temperatures in the 6 to 10 day outlook. Most of mainland Alaska is going to have higher chances to see above normal temperatures, and that's going to extend down into the northern portions of the Panhandle as well. But in the Alaska Peninsula, chances are actually going to be better to be below normal temperatures. And then for our precipitation, most of the state is expected to be near normal. Far eastern portions of the mainland, chances to be above normal for precipitation, and that's going to extend throughout the Panhandle as well.